Back in May of 2022, something absolutely wild happened in the crypto world. A massive, top-tier project basically imploded, and it wiped out billions of dollars in just a few hours. Today, we're going to unravel what happened, but we're going to do it through the eyes of one of the industry's biggest, and let's be honest, most controversial figures, Michael Saylor.
I mean, just look at this number. This really says it all. In less than a day, the Luna token, which was a huge deal in the crypto space, lost over 99% of its value. It went from a powerhouse to being practically worthless, just like that.
So that's the big question, right? This is what we're here to figure out. This wasn't some tiny, obscure coin nobody had ever heard of. No, this was a top 10 project by market cap. So how on earth could something that big just vanish so fast? Understanding the answer is, I think, a super important lesson for anyone involved in this space. All right, so to really get what happened, we've got to set the scene. This collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. It was actually the epicenter of a much, much bigger market crash that sent these huge shockwaves through the entire digital asset world.
And this is where it gets really crazy. See, it was a double collapse. On one hand, you had Luna, the main token, which just plummeted from around $80 to less than a penny. But what was maybe even more devastating was the failure of UST. That was its stablecoin. It was supposed to always be worth $1. Instead, it completely broke its peg and crashed down to just 19 cents, totally shattering everyone's trust in the entire system.
Okay, so where does Michael Saylor come into the picture? Well, he's the CEO of MicroStrategy, a company that has famously staked its future on Bitcoin, holding billions of dollars of it. So he's not just some random person with an opinion. He has massive financial skin in the game, which makes what he has to say really, really interesting.
And you really got to understand this part. While all this was happening, the whole market was crashing, and MicroStrategy's huge Bitcoin bet was suddenly in the red. People were whispering about them facing a margin call on their loans. So when Saylor started talking, he wasn't just analyzing someone else's failure. He was basically defending his entire strategy right in the middle of a 5-alarm fire.
So right in the middle of all this madness, Saylor comes out with this really simple but powerful way of looking at everything. He argued that what we were seeing was the market finally, painfully, learning the difference between two totally different kinds of digital assets. And this is the core of his whole argument.
Okay, so the first type, he calls it a security token. And in his mind, that's basically everything except Bitcoin. He thinks of them like a digital version of a company's stock. They have a central group that issues them, a management team that makes all the decisions, and a bunch of internal rules that can change at any time.
And the second type, he calls it digital property. And for Saylor, you guessed it, this club has only one member, Bitcoin. His whole point is that it's unique because there's no central company, there's no CEO, no board of directors. It's just a decentralized protocol that runs on code that everyone can see and verify for themselves.
This chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have these security tokens. They operate like a company, right? There's leadership and the rules can be super confusing and hidden from view. But on the other side, you have Bitcoin, which he says is more like digital real estate. It's like a piece of property with clear, unchanging rules that everybody knows up front.
And this whole idea, this split, it leads us right to the heart of the problem with Terra/Luna. It all comes down to what Saylor calls the fatal flaw, a massive, massive lack of transparency.
Saylor makes this great point using his own company, MicroStrategy, as an example. If you want to buy their stock, you can. You can go online, pull up all their financial documents, you can see who the CEO is, who owns most of the shares, and what the company's rules are. It's all right there out in the open, so you can make a smart decision.
But that's the thing, right? Saylor's point is that you just don't get that same clarity with most of these other security tokens. That kind of mandated transparency just isn't there, which means if you invest, you're pretty much taking a huge leap of faith.
And this quote from him, well, a paraphrase of it, it just hits the nail on the head. He talks about trying to understand Terra's policies, reading through over 200 pages of documents and just getting more and more confused. The most important questions like, hey, what are the reserves that are backing this thing? Or even, do the reserves actually exist? There were just no clear answers.
So for Saylor, that's the big takeaway from this whole mess. It was a really painful, incredibly expensive education for the entire market. It forced everyone to finally see the huge risk you take when you trust these opaque, centralized systems compared to a transparent, decentralized one.
All right, so after a collapse like that, after this brutal lesson for the market, the big question is,
What's next? And more specifically, what does it all mean for the one asset that Saylor puts in a category all by itself?
So, of course, after he laid all this out, the interviewer had to ask him the million-dollar question, or in this case, the $1 million per coin question. With all this chaos and risk, will Bitcoin really ever hit that almost mythical price target?
And his answer is, well, it's classic Saylor. Totally unfazed by everything that just happened, he says with complete confidence, it will definitely be worth more than $1 million. I just don't like to say which year. It's a bold prediction, and it kind of leaves you wondering, was this whole disaster the end of crypto? Or was it, like Saylor thinks, just a really, really painful growing pain?